Good evening and welcome to ISGAP's series. And so this evening we have a very special speaker, Dr. Vladimir Khanin, who is an associate professor of political and Middle Eastern studies at Ariel University of Samaria and Bar Ilan University in Israel. Dr. Khanin is the author of Documents on Ukrainian Jewish Identity and Emigration from 1944 to 1990. And this evening, he will be speaking to us about Jews in post-communist Russia. Should be a very stimulating, academically centered talk. So Dr. Khanin, I'd like to wish you a warm welcome on behalf of ISGAP.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate an opportunity to speak to you this night, and I will try to share with you some ideas and some information concerning the status of the present-day Russian-speaking or Russian Jewish community in the post-Soviet space. In fact, probably the first presentation of research which was completed literally a few days ago. I mean, that is why some of their information, some of the facts, most of them are presented in English, and some of them I even didn't have time to translate from Russian. So I'll try to do it. On the page or from the page, as we say. In any event, I'm going to say a few words about what the situation now concerning the government policy vis-a-vis their still quite substantial Jewish community in two major post-Soviet republics. First of all, Russian Federation, and also Ukraine. These two countries, as you know, not in the best relations in their history, but naturally, it's in this and that way impact local Jewish communities. However, we need to talk also about the future, what will be there. So whether the major question, which I will try to answer, whether the government policy, which is not anti-Semitic, in some way it's pro-Semitic, if I may say this word, concerning the Jewish community, in what way it's consistent, and whether after the abolishing of the state or government anti-Semitism, societal or day-to-day, everyday anti-Semitism also disappeared, as their Russian authorities insist, or whether inside Russian public or political culture there is something which might bring the problem again. Of course, as you know, we are not talking about absolutely theoretical issue, as it might one may conclude concerning the situation in Poland, Austria, or some other countries where we see so-called anti-Semitism without Jews. You know, if we will take studies about the situation in Poland, we see that in spite of the fact that there are something like 2,000 Jews left in this country, still a substantial part of Polish society reflect anti-Semitic sentiments. The same story in Austria, for instance, where they have something like 10,000 Jews, but according to recent estimations of the European experts, between 60 to 70% of the local society express this or that way anti-Semitic sentiments. Russia is a different story, as well as the whole post-Soviet space. According to our data, there are still something like 350,000 Jews, according to Halacha, according to religious Jewish traditional law, meaning that the Russian Jewish community, according to Israeli law return, that means people who meet the regulations of Israeli law return, meaning Jews and their family members in the second and third generation, and as well as the spouses of all these three categories, and in some case, sometimes even the fourth generation means grand-grandchildren of Jews. That means the categorization which local Jewish community work with, meaning they invite these people through the system of Jewish education to activities, holidays, and so on and so forth. That is why we could talk about the extended Jewish population. So the extended Jewish population of the post-Soviet space is about 750,000 people still. About 500,000 of them live in Russia, and something like 200,000 or 250,000 live in Ukraine, That's a minimalistic approach.
Post-World War II.
Excuse me?
So we'll take Q&A at the end, please. Thank you.
No, that's fine, fine. That's fine.
During Q&A, he'll have the opportunity to ask you at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you want to interfere in the middle, I don't mind. Please do. So this is the minimalistic approach, as I said. In fact, some experts and community activists they suggest other figures. So if we will take Chabad rabbis, they believe that just in Moscow there are about 1 million Jews, but that's probably a heavily overestimated number. The truth is somewhere in between. So we can take that between 700 to 1 million people, which this or that way related to the Jewish roots and Jewish community, or believe that they have some Jewish roots, and in certain case they're participating both in the Jewish activities, including Aliyah to Israel or immigration, according to the based on the Jewish ticket. This is quite a substantial number, making post-Soviet space, including Russia, probably the second or maybe the first largest Jewish community in the old world besides Israel, or maybe the third, the fourth, or the fifth largest Jewish community in the world. So that means that the question we are trying to pose is not just a theoretical. It has quite a lot of practical implications. If we will have a look on the contemporary Russian policy in the moment, what the official ideology in the Russian Federation is based on, we will see that it in fact is the combination of three narratives or three political traditions. The Tsarist, meaning that before 1917, before the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. The second is the Soviet narrative, or Soviet political culture. And the third, which is called Western liberal narrative and Western liberal political culture, which was adopted by Russia after the destruction of the communist regime and dispersion of the Soviet Union. So, in fact, the contemporary Soviet regime is the combination of all three. As you know, or we could guess altogether, in any case, that the anti-Semitic tradition could be part of each of that. You know, each narrative has its own anti-Semitic narrative and its own anti-Semitic tradition. In the Tsarist Russia, as you know, the Pale of Settlement, the official government anti-Semitism based on religious approach. Discrimination of Jews, according, as I said, vis-a-vis their religious background. The Soviet anti-Semitic tradition was based on much more ethnic anti-Semitism and government policy, searching of internal enemy, which we saw much more at the end of the Stalinist era, and again in the course of the Brezhnev regime, and especially we could see it at the end of the Soviet period in general. And the major point was so-called the government or official anti-Semitism of the Soviet times, meaning discrimination of Jews in terms of getting in terms of the job opportunities, education, career advancement, and so on, distribution of social goods, and so on and so forth. That did not prevent them from being quite successful and becoming, at least most of them, became part of the local Soviet middle class, of course, in the Soviet terms. But still, the official government policy was anti-Semitic. Many believe that, in fact, the societal or public day-to-day anti-Semitism was the result of this government policy and government politics. Still, quite a number of studies show that the societal public anti-Semitism actually developed regardless or not necessarily dependently to the government policy. The Second World War, as we know, made a great impact on their local non-Jewish population. The German policy, the fascist regimes on the occupied territories, the fascist propaganda, and also in addition to that, the official government policy of the late Stalinist regime which used the anti-Semitic sentiments in order to mobilize the support of the population to the government, to the regime, in favor of the regime against an additional internal enemy, actually was also a substantial part of the development of anti-Semitic sentiments within their Soviet public, Slavic population and non-Slavic population in the Soviet Union. And the third stream, meaning Western liberal narrative, from the one hand, it's actually should have nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Officially, the state anti-Semitism was abolished in 1990. When I looked for materials for my book on anti-Semitism, on the Russian Jewish identity and immigration, together with my friend Dr. Boris Morozov, who worked in the Russian archives, and I worked in the Ukrainian archives, including archives of the former KGB and the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine. We found quite a lot of stuff which showed that it was a special Politburo, that means their political center of the Communist Party, of the Russian regime decision to abolish the official anti-Semitism, which happened exactly 26 years ago, in March 1990, which means that it was an official decision to stop anti-Semitic propaganda, to stop discrimination, and so on and so forth. And after that, it was believed that without the state support, the social anti-Semitism is going to disappear as well. That never happened. In fact, the Western liberal model of political and social and cultural thinking also included some anti-Semitic sentiments, both imported from the West. The West also has its own model or version of anti-Semitism, as you know, but not as much. But that's actually the influence of this element was not so strong. But now we see new elements which could be related to the Western liberal narrative in the Russian political culture, contemporary political culture. So without not having the government anti-Semitism, we have new forms of contemporary anti-Semitism, meaning political anti-Semitism, using the Jewish topic for political needs and interests, including the conflicts between various political groups, both within the country and between the countries. For instance, anti-Semitic card is quite successfully played in contemporary Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Concerning the crisis in eastern Ukraine, then we realize quite widespread so-called media anti-Semitism, use of various media assets, especially so-called the new media, internet, Facebook, and so on and so forth, for development of the or spreading of anti-Semitic ideas. We are talking about various forms of new forms of societal anti-Semitism and religious anti-Semitism, which is quite new. It was not so developed in the Soviet times, since religion as something was not a part of the official establishment. The church, Muslim communities, they were actually accepted by the government, but were not a part of the establishment. So now, as they are nowadays. So at the moment, their narrative or their approach to various issues is a part of the official or semi-official approach. Some of them they're not so active in the anti-Semitic sphere according to this background. However, we could notice some of the Muslim communities and also Christian communities may use the anti-Semitic sentiments in order to strengthen their power, their ideological influence, and their interests, including social and economic interests. If you will, saying all that, I would say that in spite of all that, the post-Soviet space is still much less anti-Semitic than contemporary Europe, for instance. I would say that Jews still feel relatively secure there as the Jews. I'm not talking about the economic status, I'm not talking about political status, I'm talking about being Jewish, you know. It is not only a shame to be Jewish in contemporary Russia, but pretty secure to be Jewish, you know. As far as it's if not to take into account the question whether it's secure to be a normal citizen in Russia at the moment. Not about this I'm talking, but concerning the situation in contemporary France, for instance, or even Britain, or even Germany. Situation in Russia and Ukraine is much more secure for Jews than it used to be before, and then in many of West European countries. We will take anti-Semitic events in Russia. So we have, all in all, like 30 sentiments in the last year, 30 events, anti-Semitic events of all types in Russia. Of course, registered events. Many of them were probably not registered, but still we can talk both all the spectrum of anti-Semitic events, meaning from day-to-day conflict and up to attacks vis-a-vis anti-Semitic or xenophobic background. You see that the number of victims in these anti-Semitic sentiments, that beaten people or attacked people, attacked vocally, physically, is constantly decreasing from 99 in 2013 to 77 in 2014 and 31 in 2015. So it's not so terrible situation as we can see in at the moment, for instance, in Belgium, in France, or some other states, some other European states. If we will have the acts of anti-Semitic vandalism, vandalism in the Jewish cemeteries, synagogues, community centers, Jewish schools, kindergartens, monuments, commemorating the victims of the Holocaust and so on and so forth. That means all the acts of hooliganism or attacks that may be defined that they were done according to anti-Semitic background. So we can say that in Russia it is between 10 to 12, not so much. In Ukraine, we have more accurate data because in Ukraine we have groups of people that register very carefully and very quite accurately all the events that could be regarded anti-Semitic. So as you can see, it's the peak was in 2007. Then it constantly decreased until 2 recent years when the war between Russia and Ukraine started, or a war of Ukraine with their East Ukrainian separatists. It's upon you to find the politically correct word for that. Due to their growth of their xenophobia in general and the growth of how we would define it, always in the stand of war, people permit themselves to do what they would never probably do in the peaceful situation. So some of these acts could be also regarded as an anti-Semitic acts. We don't know exactly whether the vandalism in the Jewish cemetery happened due to the fact that it was specifically Jewish cemetery, or due to the fact that people were looking for the place to express their understanding of current situation. But still, if we will take into account all in all, we will see that it's probably grew a little bit, but one may say that it grew substantially, 4 or 5 folds, but still the whole number is not so dramatic. Here is you can see the graph concerning the number of in red. You see the number of registered acts of anti-Semitic vandalism. And in white, you can see the number of those number of victims in anti-Semitic incidents. So you can see that in spite of the growing number of vandalism in the 2 recent years, the number of those who actually were damaged continues to decrease. So That's also another graph showing their number of anti-Semitic events between 2004 and 2014. There is a certain growth in the recent years, but still it is not. We should not over-dramatize it. Meaning that officially, from the official point of view, openly, I would say, the situation is not so bad. But our question is whether it could be worse. And our question is to understand, to realize, and to try to explore what are the objectives, why it, despite of the quite difficult political, social, and economic situation there, why it doesn't happen, why anti-Semitism and xenophobia is not growing, are not growing. On the other hand, whether we could oversee the possibility that it will come back. So I would say there are a few reasons that why the anti-Semitism, classical anti-Semitism, is relatively low in these countries. The first reason I would say that in many FSU states, as I said, Jewish communities decreased dramatically, so there is no interface, or interface decreased, meaning day-to-day interconnections between Jews and non-Jews actually is not so substantial as it was in Soviet times, and so Jews actually, quite many of them, those who had strong Jewish identity and so-called models of behavior that were identified or attributed to Jews, they already left in the recent 25, 30 years. So those who stayed there, they much more integrated into the local society in all terms. Local Jews actually, as you know, always were integrated part of the local society. But in fact, we can even use the word assimilated here. So many of them behave as Russians, speak as Russians, eat as Russians, go as Russians, do what most of the other groups of the population do. So you should be very careful in order to identify Jew and should have a very specific or strong need to make a damage or to express your anti-Semitic feeling in order to found this Jew. So probably one of the reasons that actually with the decrease of the Jewish community, the anti-Semitic sentiments decreasing in the society. The second reason is that Jews at the moment are replaced in the public opinion, in the public discourse, as the major enemy with the other groups. First of all, these groups are the objects for the xenophobia, mostly Caucasians. That means Chechens, Dagestanians, this group of the North Caucasian Muslim population, which by many Slavs in Russia are regarded to be the major enemy or major challenge for the Russian identity, for the Russian stability, for the status of the Slavic population of titular nations, and so on and so forth. We may say that probably two Russian-Chechnya wars, one started by President Yeltsin and the second by President Putin, the incumbent president, actually increased these feelings against Chechens. And of course, there are substantial Chechen communities, Caucasian communities, much more visible in big Russian population centers like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Ekaterinburg, or in Ukraine, but especially in Russia, and in comparing to almost invisible Russian-speaking Jewish communities, could attract much more attention and could be much more, I would say, convenient, immediate address for expressing the xenophobia feelings than the Jews. The second group are actually Muslim migrants from the Central Asia, from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and especially Tajikistan. Those who are, or Azerbaijan, those who are in massive leave their home countries, after the destruction of the Soviet Union and directing their ways to their steps to Russia in order to get much better paid jobs than or living conditions that they could afford in their home countries. For instance, majority of overwhelming number of the so-called handwork, blue-collar work in Moscow, in construction, in services, in cleaning, sweeping, car washing. You understand what I mean. Actually, all the job places are captured by the migrants, gastarbeiters, from the southern republics of the former Soviet Union, which actually a good way to attract attention of those who still believe that Russia is for Russians, whatever it means. Slavic population or indigenous citizens and so on and so forth. So Jews became much less attractive as an address for this xenophobia. That's probably another reason. To that, one can add also current political situation. Which for Russian society could be much more actual, much more important than looking for internal enemy. At the moment, there is quite a number, quite a list of so-called external enemies. In Russia, that's the West. You know, the West in the whatever it means, United States, Europe, and so on and so forth. Russia at the moment is trying to return the status of superpower in the under the presidency of Vladimir Putin. So it's going to be or return the status of second superpower, or at least regional superpower. So and official propaganda and public discourse, public opinion is pretty anti-Western, especially anti-American, as you probably know. So mass propaganda, TV propaganda, radio, other media assets are quite anti-American. So in this situation, when the Russian motherland is in danger and there is an external enemy, there is no need, as I said, to look for internal enemy. And that is why Jews became much less important, especially concerning the fact that many of them are a part of so-called official establishment. We should take into account that official government policy, if it's not pro-Semitic, it's not anti-Semitic. Vladimir Putin is not anti-Semite in no way, you know, in any way. So, and public opinion see quite a number of so-called representable Jews or court Jews in his inner circle. So, from this point of view, Jews should, the government is not interested to take Jews as their possible enemies, so that enough enemies are outside the country. It's interestingly enough that the fact that, for instance, the inner circle of President Obama includes not a few Jews, you know, is not a reason to, you know, to provide more anti-Semitic feelings within their own, inject anti-Semitic feelings within the Russian community. So government, at least government doesn't need it in this stage. As far as Ukraine is concerned, we may say that they have their own external enemy, which is Russia, you know, imperial Russia. Ukrainians believe that the current situation in eastern Ukraine is inspired by their Russian imperialism or renewed Russian imperialism. So I would say that the solidarity of the society needs everybody in this war against imperialist aspirations and interests of Moscow. So they need everybody, all the nations and all the ethnic groups and religious groups within the Ukraine, including Jews. So Ukrainians do not see Jews as the enemy. On the contrary, I would say to be Jewish, and especially to be Israeli in Ukraine, that's my own experience as a brand, you know. Many Ukrainians want to be like Israelis in all the meaning of this word. It means to study how to learn with the problem, if they're unable to handle the problem, and to be like a strong, developed, successful country, and to learn from Jews how to be a startup nation. So in all meanings of this word. So if we will take, for instance, Southern Caucasus countries like Armenia and Azerbaijan, so they see each other as an enemies. So in this situation, they don't need Jews. The third reason I would say why we don't see the official anti-Semitism at the moment is actually that in spite of the intellectual influence from the West, from Europe, Russia is not ill with their left-wing intellectual anti-Semitism of the European countries. You can see this guy, Vladislav Surkov. He's an official ideologist of Mr. Putin. Quite an educated, I would say, a brilliant intellectual, a poet, and he's the person who developed the so-called the concept of a sovereign democracy. That's an official ideology of the Russian government at the moment. So I would say that he's a typical representative of contemporary Russian intellectuals, or like Russians say, intelligentsia. You know what I mean here. There's a specific Russian word defining not just intellectuals, but a group of a part of the population, or a group of the population which are responsible for development of the public agenda in the different aspects, in the culture, economy, politics, and so on and so forth. So contrary to, I would say, European intellectuals, which are, I mean, the left wing or radical left, which are pretty anti-Semitic. Russian intelligentsia is not anti-Semitic. Maybe, some of the, I spoke to to people who are related to the team of Mr. Surkov, and they said, we are very much in favor of the European values, but left-wing European anti-Semitism would be probably the last European value that we will adopt in the future. So at the moment it is not so important. Another reason I would say that the question with their FSU Muslim minority. You might know, ladies and gentlemen, that in fact, gentlemen and you lady, that in fact Russia enjoys the biggest Muslim minority, the biggest Muslim population in Europe. So about 40 million, or 35 million, or 36 million, according to different estimations of Russia's citizens are actually ethnic Muslims. You understand what I mean. That means majority of them probably do not follow, strictly follow the Muslim commandments, but they came from the Muslim cultural background. So for the majority of the FSU Muslims, as you can see here, which identity, as I said, is much more ethnic rather than religious, anti-Semitism is not so important, is less important than one could expect, especially in comparison to what we see in the Central and Western Europe. And many of these groups did not adopt the anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli feelings as it is quite visible within the Muslim communities in Europe and, of course, in the Middle East. Also, the situation is changing. As I mentioned here, last year was the first time when one of the Muslim clerics was convicted for anti-Semitic propaganda. We never had it in 1990s. We almost didn't see it in early 2000, beginning of this century, but we more and more see it now. The government was not going to pay attention to that until it crossed the red line. So the fact that a Muslim cleric was convicted for that means that there is a phenomenon. It's not so strong phenomenon as we can see in within the Muslim communities in Paris, in Germany, in London,
Sweden.
but
Denmark, Sweden.
Excuse me?
Denmark or Sweden?
Denmark, Sweden, and so on. Of course. But still, places like Tatarstan, in some areas of Muslim republics or autonomous areas in the Volga region and so on and so forth, we see it more and more. Of course, it's more important imported anti-Semitism, if you understand what I mean. People learn in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Turkey, and they bring these ideas with them. The government see it as a challenge. First of all, as a challenge to the stability, as we can see here. You recognize this marcher, I understand. This is President Vladimir Putin, and it's not by chance. These pictures are here. In fact, one of the elements of this contemporary Russian narrative is the Soviet narrative. One of the elements of the Soviet narrative is that non-authorized violence is not accepted. It's the government decision whether the society should love Jews or hate Jews, but that's the government decision, okay? If you understand what I mean. So any attempts to show something which is not authorized by the government is accepted as the challenge of the government and the challenge of the local internal stability. So one of the reasons why it never happened until now is the fact that the government is not anti-Semitic. Does it mean that the government is Philosemitic? Many people believe yes. Okay. Well, it's a very interesting phenomenon, by the way, sociologically interesting phenomenon. Many people in Russia expect government to be anti-Semitic. So, and when they understand that the government is not, they ask questions why. Why the government is not anti-Semitic? So that means then they have different explanations why. Either it is now it's suppressed in a latent form and it's waiting for the time. Whether it's just because that is sort of a government manipulation. Now it's more convenient or more fruitful not to be anti-Semite. They're trying to explain it due to some personal estimates, sentiments that, of Mr. Putin and members of this government, and so on and so forth. So, in any event, so if you will have a look, we will have a look on recent opinion polls of the Levada Center, for instance. That's one of the most respectable public opinion research centers in Russia. So quite many of those who participated in their studies, actually they say, yes, they do believe that non-anti-Semitism means pro-Semitism, lack of their anti-Jewish sentiments in the government position and activities means that they're in favor of Jews. That's probably the part of the local political culture, and we are unable to do anything about it at the moment. Still, after saying all this, to conclude this portion here, saying all this, we are unable to say that Russia, as well as the post-Soviet space in general, like we say in Hebrew, natul antisemiyut, is lacking anti-Semitism in general. That means that still we have quite a number of manifestation of anti-Semitism, which shows that these feelings are there, whether they're suppressed, whether they're active, whether they're open, but still they're there. Okay, let's start with their models of that. The first group, I would say, that crimes inspired by Judophobia. Among them are graffiti and swastika at military and Holocaust memorials, vandalism, as I mentioned before, against synagogues, Jewish education institutions, and so on and so forth. Just 3 examples of these activities. This is a swastika at the memorial tomb in the Babi Yar. I believe to this audience I should not explain what Babi Yar is. The place of massacres of Jews in the ravine near Kiev in 1949 and the years of the Second World War, one of the symbols of Holocaust of the European Jewry. So the group of hooligans motivated by xenophobia, anti-Semitic sentiments, or probably other motivations nobody really knows, found the best way to express them than to write the symbol of fascist Germany in the memorial stone in this Reven, in the place where, according to different estimations, at least 120 to 130,000 Jews, and not only Jews, were killed. The second example, actually, we would probably could define it as anti-Jewish xenophobia or Judophobia motivated by religious feelings. This is the oil. You know what oil is. That means a special construction on the tomb of the important rabbi, tzaddik, Hasidic tzaddik. This is oil on the construction on the tomb of daughters of the Rabbi Nachman of Braslav. Rabbi Braslav Mi'uman, you know. So quite an important figure for East European Hasidic movement, for East European Hasidism. And the third is in Novomoskovsk, that is Dnepropetrovsk area, which you visited, sir, not long ago, and that's actually a Holocaust memorial in Novomoskovsk. The three elements: the Holocaust memorial, traditional religious object, and I would say the modern ethnic object here. And here you see the activities of, in two cases, of neo-Nazi. But here you do not see swastikas. What you see red stars, the symbols of the Soviet Union. And in Russian it is written here, oops, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. And in Russian you see here, it's written May, that means May, and work. You know, the slogans of the Soviet epoch, you know. With these slogans, people were obliged or voluntarily went to the May Day demonstrations of solidarity with the working people, one of the official Soviet holidays in that times. So, oops. What did I do? I did something wrong. Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So you see here three different streams of I would say traditional, it's better to say neo-traditional Judophobia. Religious, Soviet societal, and I would say modern neo-fascist. If we will come back to what I defined as the media anti-Semitism, we can see that today, especially in the new forms of the social media and internet, their space for this anti-Semitic propaganda and assignments to hostility against Jews is quite substantial. You see hundreds of anti-Semitic or semi-anti-Semitic publications in the printed and electronic media. It goes every year, you know, annually it happens. Only in 2015, that's just to show you what the story is, Russian authorities removed, and how many of them they didn't, you know, extremist information from more than 4,500 of internet sites. They blocked 800 sites, including 160, as you see, that opened for raising funds and recruitment of activities for volunteers for the terrorist organizations, including Daesh. How you say Daesh? What is Islamic State here? In the middle, we in Israel use their Arab abbreviation Daesh. You know, Islamic State and other Al Qaeda groups and so on and so forth. So people get education in the Middle East and Turkey. They come back. They inject their own understanding of Islam. They bring radical Islamist ideas. They recruit supporters. they open the user quite extensively and successfully media assets and what we have, you know. Of course, that's the top of the iceberg concerning what is going on, in fact. Again, media anti-Semitism, if we will try to realize, to identify what are specific elements of this media anti-Semitism. So you can see here that that's first of all, promotion of public stereotypes, negative public stereotypes concerning the Jews, for instance, blaming them that they're imminently not loyal or are oriented against the so-called titular population. We see quite oftenly that this sort of publication, they attribute to Jews hostile actions and dangerous attitudes toward the other nations. Quite a new phenomenon, the Holocaust revision. Why it's quite new? Because in the Soviet times, the Soviet government actually was not ready to accept a specific Jewish character of this tragedy. So if we could soar some monuments commemorating the victims of the Second World War, authorities did everything in their power to cover, not to permit or actually to remove the fact that in fact that these Soviet citizens were Jewish, you know. In the Babi Yar there was a tomb where it was written hundreds of thousands of Soviet citizens are buried here, victims of the fascist occupation. But they did everything in their power to, in order not to let people know that these Soviet citizens were actually of Jewish origin. At the late of the Soviet era and in the post-Soviet era, there was an explosion of knowledge about the Holocaust. A lot of studies, new archives became opened and available, new information available, a lot of publications. So just relatively recently, the post-Soviet public started to be acquainted with what happened in the Second World War in terms of the Jewish aspect, of the Jewish angle of this catastrophe. And until recently, we didn't see their attempts to revise their what is called this information or the whole concept of the Holocaust, of the Jewish tragedy or unique tragedy, which is attributed to the Jewish people. But in the publications of the recent few years, we can see that, you know. In majority of cases, what is used, they use their elements, the phenomenon, the tools which is used by anti-Semitic propaganda all over the world, both in Europe and in the Middle East, that the number of victims are over-dramatized, exaggerated, that in fact everybody were victims, everybody has their own tragedy, and not just Jews, you know. Yeah, and so on. Okay. And finally, the denial of a right of Israel to exist. And political anti-Semitism. First of all, as I said, it's playing Jewish card in politics. There are a few quotes from our focus groups, from people who participate in our focus groups. Probably I don't have time to translate all of them, but just believe me that there are many of them quite normal people. We had, I would say, reasonable people that were invited to these groups to discuss it. And we understand that, in fact, these anti-Semitic feelings, or many researchers believe that they should be called not anti-Semitic but asemitic. Means there's not against of Jews, in fact, but as a part of their world vision, you know. Nothing personal, nothing special, you know. It's nothing personal, but you know by yourself that you are like you are, you know. So, for instance, one of the Muslims that we interviewed him in Northern Caucasus, in Dagestan. When Chechens attacked Dagestan, the governor of the region came to journalists and started to discuss the activities of Zionist centers in New York. Why Zionist? Why in New York? I don't know, that they are trying to destabilize situation in different points of the globe, and now that's exactly what happens here. In fact, some of the despite of the fact that the Kremlin is not anti-Semitic, but the local government, local authorities are quite ready to play this card. Now we see the anti-Semitic radical right and left movements. We have trying to use this Jewish card in order to blackmail political enemies. It could be, blaming them that they're Jewish, and that is why they should be, an enemy of the people, and then on the other hand, otherwise, it could be otherwise, blaming them that they're anti-Semites, and that is why they should not be accepted as their legitimate political leaders. As I said, we saw that quite extensively in the framework of this current Russian-Ukrainian crisis. We have quite widespread, we identified quite a widespread long list of anti-Semitic stereotypes that still exist. For instance, many of our respondents still believe that Jews rule the world. Okay, yeah. That might be so, but but for them it's not a question. They're absolutely sure that this is the case, for good and for worse. I mean, please understand what I mean. Some of them say that, okay, maybe it's a correct situation, I don't know, but Jews rule the world. We ask the question whether Jewish could be head of the Russian state. That means, could a Jew be president of the Russian Federation? We expected to say yes because, or no because, but we got researchers got much more interesting explanation. Why you are asking this question? They say Jews are ruling this. The Jews actually ruling Russia, and that was always happened. Lenin was Jewish. All of her members of the Russian government in the Lenin times, they were either Jewish or half Jewish. Practically all of them. Lenin in fact established the state of Israel. Of course, Stalin helped him. That's quite a young generation, educated. It's not in Moscow, in the province, but that's what people believe at the moment. Yeltsin is Jewish. Medvedev is Jewish. By the way, I also heard that Vladimir Putin is also Jewish, and he is also Masonic. The second point is that Jews are responsible by themselves, responsible for anti-Semitism. Jews are always in power. The Jews still insist that they are chosen people. That's something new. Let me come back to let me conclude. Okay, I'm not going to read from the wall. I understand that there are no illiterate people in this room, so you can see the conclusion of the study. That first of all, decrease of state anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic violence, to my mind, and to the mind of most of the researchers, doesn't mean that societal anti-Semitism had disappeared. We still are able to identify between 8 to 10% of the population who is a strong core of feelings of the anti-Jewish xenophobia. We have a sort of a sleeping anti-Semitism, and in fact, their challenges, threats, and risks for the Russian Jewish population is relatively lower. But there is quite a lot of elements of societal anti-Semitism or asemitism which are inside. And in fact, it very much relates or depends on the government. If the government will be interested to place this card, it might found, I would say, a certain understanding in the eyes and in the hearts of the Russian population. That's probably one of the most important conclusions of this study. Thank you very much.